Ari was always a very bright and busy little boy. He was our first child, so we didn't know any different. We assumed this was how babies are. And he was absolutely delightful, and he met his milestones mostly early as a baby, and everything was great. He was very energetic, a lot of energy. What did you say? You used to call him a dynamo. Yeah.
Yes. I think it was probably about 2 when we started seeing there was just this incessant energy, and there was something that was concerning his teachers to begin with. I think that they kind of pointed it out first, that there was something that perhaps we should look at. I know we both found it quite frustrating that they wouldn't say what it was. But from then you could see, I remember once picking him up and his top was moving and his bottom was moving and only his torso was still because I was holding it. And I think that's where the awareness started.
Yeah, he went to play school from 18 months, and before he was 3, the teachers were flagging concerns that he couldn't sit still, and that he couldn't sit still long enough to do a puzzle, and that he would wander off during song ring and things like that. So while he was really achieving a lot at school in other ways, those concerns were flagged quite early on. Okay, so it was quite a journey to the point that I felt the need to write a book about it because it really was back and forth and up and down. I think, Warren, you sort of accepted things a little bit faster than I did.
Yeah, my approach, I think maybe being the lawyer, was these are people that I know and like and trust, and they're telling me something and it kind of accords with what I'm seeing. Okay, yes. Let's help him. Let's figure out what this is. We were both very anti-medicine to begin with.
Yes.
Everyone had heard such bad stories about Ritalin. So we did, Lauren will tell you, we did everything first. It was a year before we came to you, when we first were given a name.
Yes.
Yeah, I accepted it earlier. I was prepared to accept it. Because yes, he was busy. But by the time the symptoms manifested as they did when he was off the medication that you put him on,
yes,
he was older. Yes. And you could see the differences. Then it really manifested. So by the time the behavior became a bit of a challenge, we were already on the journey with you by then. Yes. I was worried about him. I wasn't sure if he was happy because he didn't really talk about it much. He was small.
Yeah.
But I was worried for him. It wasn't really impacting the family.
The one thing that I will say, not that it impacted the family, but one thing that I remember noticing because of how the family is structured. So he's the oldest, and 18 months later, we had another little boy, also full of energy and full of beans and delightful little kid, but neurotypical. And I do remember very distinctly seeing his threshold is so much higher for volume and for stimulation that to get through to him, you have to be quite ebullient. And when I reacted that way to my younger child, I gave him a big fright because he really only needed a little tap on the shoulder, not a whole big reaction. But I knew that with Ari, if I didn't react at that size, it wouldn't register. And that for me was a turning point where I was like, okay, this is something very different we're dealing with.
And I think that is absolutely right. With your first child, you kind of tend to kind of blame yourself a bit as parents for the way things might or might not go right. And you kind of think that your parenting style is the problem. And that's such a common thing, is where parents blame themselves, maybe not in your case, but a lot of parents would look at the teacher and the school. They think, well, is it the school? Is it the teacher? Is it the system? Is it the diet? Is it, too much screen time, technology, too much pressure, those kind of things.
I read a lot of parenting books, even before the ones that you recommended. Right from the beginning, I was reading tons and tons of books on organization and discipline and encouragement and parenting strategies. So we were kind of doing our level best, and it
Yeah.
didn't seem to be manageable. We definitely trusted this play school and his teachers. We knew them personally, and they both had a lot of experience with this age group. So we knew that there was something going on, but no one would put a name to it, which was so very debilitating and frustrating for us.
And we know how lucky we are that these are people that we trusted implicitly.
Yes.
And when they were saying, listen, it wasn't accusatory. It was always from the point of view of what are we going to do? How are we going to address this? We never felt under pressure.
No.
But when they were saying it, we felt under pressure as parents, but not that we were being judged.
What were the sort of problems that you thought it could be, or that you maybe were concerned about?
Well, obviously, at the beginning, I thought no one else knew what they were talking about because he's my child and he's perfect, and how could there be anything wrong with him? Having said that, as I said, we were very careful about choosing caregivers in schools, and we really did trust them. Even once we completely admitted that there was room for improvement, I was very reluctant to go the medication route because of the stigma attached to abuse of Ritalin and things like that. So I decided we're going to try absolutely everything else that we can before we try Ritalin. And this is what I go into with the book. We did everything. We did the educational psychological assessment, the full thing more than once. We did occupational therapy. We did all the reading of the books and the different discipline strategies. We played with the diet, we did everything else first, and then we went to a medical professional, and we then went for a second opinion, and that's when we ended up with you.
And Lauren, tell me something about, did you see any impact on things like diet that made a difference? Supplements, products, did you feel it was something that really made a big difference, or it wasn't sort of a directional change?
No. It might have helped a bit. It depended on the day, but no.
I remember clearly. I mean, it's now nearly 10 years.
Wow, is it that long? Hey, wow.
I think he's 3. You saying he has mixed type ADHD, and it's a medical condition. And Ritalin's been abused, but in the right circumstances, Ritalin works, and it'll work for Ari. That was night and day. Then we saw it, but the diet, I think we were so ready for the next step because we knew we tried everything else and it hadn't worked. It needed something else, and we saw it the next day.
Right. And tell me, you mentioned things like occupational therapy.
It did help. The OT did help, but he was in OT for several years, and there was some improvement. We did the crash mats. He had those swingy things that he sat on. We did everything. We sharpened his roll-ups. We did all of that stuff, and he hated it. And it didn't make a huge difference. I do want to talk about with the medication, though. I was very, very hesitant. Even once we tried it, and we could see immediately that there was a big improvement immediately. So we knew we were going to go through with it. And I think that I would have lost my mind a little bit if it hadn't have been for someone like you who knows what you're talking about, and you would predict what would happen, and it was almost to a T. That it wasn't as simple as here's a pill, there's your problem solved. The pills were absolutely crucial in allowing him to be able to work with us to solve the problem.
Only recently he was reading a book. I mean, he knows he has to take his meds every day.
This is after many years of taking medication.
Now that he's 12, he was reading a book
with a character who has ADHD.
And he came to me and said, Dad, I think I have ADHD. And I said, yes.
Do you mind sharing that book? What book?
It's Percy Jackson. He's
Ari Barat.
No, it's Percy Jackson.
Okay, there's 2 then.
And there's Percy Jackson, who's the son of Poseidon, the sea god, and there's this whole range. And he came to me, he was standing in the kitchen making his breakfast, and he said, I think I have ADHD. And I said, you do have ADHD. And he looked at me and said, well, why didn't you tell me? I said, because until now, you didn't need to know.
Yes, you didn't ask.
Then we had interesting debates, because every time he wouldn't do something, he'd tell me it was ADHD. But it was only now that there was any awareness from him. Up to that point, we'd say you need to take your meds because it's easier for you to concentrate on them. He didn't show any interest really in the whys and the wherefores. He got on with what he got on with.
I said to him, do you feel any different on them? And he said, no, I don't think so. And I remember saying to him, when I see you without the medicine, you seem like a really bright, happy little boy who has a little bit of trouble concentrating. And on the medicine, I see a bright, even happier little boy because you're able to concentrate. And he agreed with me. He said, yes, I do feel like that.
He's saying at one point when he's off the meds, it's like there are bees in his head. We couldn't have a discussion further. But I remember that on the meds, I don't have bees in my head, something like that.
Once we had a discussion about what is ADHD. How did you feel as parents, and what did it mean to you?
From my point of view, it was just relief. It had a name. We had a plan. We had a professional that we felt comfortable with. And now we could help him. That to me was the heartbreaking part, was seeing this kid through no fault of his own who had a challenge. And we couldn't help. I mean, he wasn't unhappy, but we knew it could be better. And I was just hugely relieved.
So I'm quite keen to hear from you guys. What did you sort of see when he was on his medicine, or maybe when he wasn't taking his medicine at home, those sort of impulsive needs, or how things changed over time?
As you know, the medicine would wear off early afternoon, and then we couldn't top him up too often because then he wouldn't eat. Chalk and cheese.
Really?
Yeah.
He'll come up with the loud, random noises.
He'll bait his siblings with less self-control than he would.
He won't look at you. That's the kicker, is when sort of I'll click my fingers and say, here, I'm here. And the eyes aren't connecting.
And when you have to ask him 6 times to do something that normally he would do on number 1 or 2.
The family's taken on that kind of dynamic.
How did it impact his siblings? We've heard how it impacted you guys, but how did you feel that it impacted his siblings?
So he's the oldest, so they've never known any different. But having said that, as the little ones get older, they find it immensely frustrating. It's also very hard to strike a balance because we're not going to let him get away with something just because he has a condition. I mean, we are helping him take every active step to support him to treat the condition. So that doesn't mean he can now blame everything on ADHD and do what he wants. But he does require different types of discipline and different types of motivation. And so it becomes a challenge that you can't treat all the kids equally because they're not equal in that sense. Each one has their unique needs, and his are quite a lot different from the other 2 who are only a little bit different. During the first lockdown, I was nearly tearing my hair out, I think, with the rest of the country. And as I said, it was quite difficult with 3 different children and 3 different learning styles to try to keep them all in line. And I found that physical tools were very helpful. So I designed cards that could be cashed in for different kinds of taking breaks. We set up a little tuck shop as an incentive with money. We had lists and checklists and schedules and things like that posted all around. And all of that really helped Ari in particular, but all 3 of the children, because they could literally see what was expected of them, and they could literally budget their time and their resources according to what they could see. And that really, really helped a lot.
And you are busy writing a book, without trying to give away too much about what you're going to be sharing, would you mind just sort of kind of giving us some sort of idea, as to what motivated you, and also, what we can expect in your book?
With pleasure. So I read widely, and it was all very helpful. But one thing that I struggled to find was local South African true stories of people who had been on this journey, because it appears from what I've read that it's handled differently in different areas around the world. And we have been very blessed on our journey to have very supportive teachers, to have first-class medical professionals, to have people who really care on our journey. And we've still gone through so much frustration. Now, I can only imagine what somebody without that luck, really, to find the right people and to find the right team, how frustrating it must be. For ADHD, once we finally really kind of got the hang of it, that's when I started putting it together, because it was such a long and convoluted journey. By sharing that, gives somebody else some insight and some ideas in how to shape their own journey, then I hope that'll help.
Now that's wonderful. I think that is going to make a big difference, because it's almost kind of demystifying what the problem is, because there is no special test. There's not a liter of blood that you can take, or a scan, or a particular MRI or CAT scan that you can do.
Yeah.
And it is a journey. And I think that one of the things about ADHD is that it is a problem that I think still today in different societies is, just a naughty child, a child that kind of needs more discipline,
Misunderstood.
needs a different school environment. When you look forward, to maybe the next chapter, going forward, looking at Ari's journey through his senior primary through to high school and becoming a young adult.
I think for me, it's the same thing that all parents have, is will he be okay? How do we unlock him? How do we find the right school that he'll fit into, that will fit him? How do we put the right scaffolding around him that recognizes he has a condition but doesn't incapacitate him, that doesn't give him an excuse not to do and not to try?
Yes.
And how do we deal with hormones? Because you're starting to see it. He's now a teenager. He's so the whole world is genuinely against him. And how's this going to play out? And is he going to remain as happy as he is? I think that's the thing for me. Is will he be a happy kid?
For me, there's a lot about the information factor and the misinformation factor, should I say. And I think that as a family, we have had to explore and come to terms with what this actually means and how that translates into our daily lives. And I think that as society, we still need to do that as well. And I'm hoping that through sharing our story, that other people can understand a bit more what it's like.
There are others who have it, and there are other parents who are going through it. It's okay.
For me, there's two messages. The one is do your research, read as much as you can, talk to other people. And the second point is get your team right, because we have had the best medical professionals. We could not have done this without you, Dr. Flett. We've had teachers, we've had all the supplemental therapies and things like that. And they haven't all been needed all at the same time. But to have the right people supporting you is invaluable.
I know people whose kids clearly have ADHD.
Takes one to know
it
one.
Takes one to know one, and who haven't accepted the diagnosis and who respond viscerally to it as if it's a criticism, and when it just really isn't. So I think the only message, maybe it's for the dads, maybe it's for everyone, is don't be afraid of the diagnosis. It's not a criticism. You can't help our children until we understand what they need. And once you do that, once you accept it, you can unlock this and you can help them. And don't be afraid of it. It's just embrace it. It is what it is. And it can be helped. And you've got to be willing.
And as you said, it can be a superpower. It's not always a problem. It's a wonderful power, but you do need to know how to steer the thing.
The role of a father is something that often is lacking in the whole strategy. And you literally have to be literally on the same hymn page. When he feels secure, he's got, these pillars at home. If you both are present and you connect with each other, it literally is that missing ingredient that is essential in the management of this. It is literally.
That's a lot of the focus of the book as well, is our relationship and how we approached the journey together. And I think that in the same way that my book about P&D has helped couples, because one part, usually the feminine part, can hand it to the masculine part and say, read this and see if that can help you to relate to me. In the same way, I'm hoping that we can put this out there, that other couples can read it and see different ways that they could potentially interact with each other that could be helpful.